Okay, so I'm going to start particularly with this question because it touches upon Tu Bishvat that we celebrated today, and at the same time, it touches upon the International Holocaust Memorial Day that was yesterday on January 27th. So, this is the first question. I found it interesting that Tu Bishvat started January 27th, and Holocaust Memorial Day is January 27th. That's right. To be more exact, Tu Bishvat started last night at the end of January 27th. Thinking about my family that was murdered during the war, and may their memory be a blessing. Fine, that's question number one. There's no doubt a connection between the International Holocaust Memorial Day and Tu Bishvat, because nothing happens, of course, just by coincidence. We don't believe that in Judaism. Everything is, as we say, Hashgacha Pratit, divine providence, and therefore there must be a connection between the two. It's true. I fully agree that there's a very deep connection between the symbolism of both days, because Holocaust Memorial Day, of course, symbolizes the decimation, really, of Europe, in particular of 6 million Jews. Tu B'Shvat, on the other hand, is a holiday in which we celebrate the growth of everything that is good in this world, starting from the trees themselves, trees that are alive, that keep growing, that keep providing, that keep benefiting the world via giving oxygen or fruits or any other blessing that they provide. And I think the fact that Holocaust Memorial Day happened yesterday, and immediately we transition into Tu B'Shvat, I think symbolizes, and we have to draw a lesson from this, but it symbolizes one of the great ideas that Judaism, I believe, introduced to the world, and that is that after every challenge, a spur of growth must happen. And indeed, if you think about this, in Jewish history, each time we faced a challenge, especially the toughest one, we responded with a spur of growth like the world has never seen before. Give me a challenge and I'll show you the growth that happened after that. Just to name a few examples, after the destruction of the Second Temple, when the Jews were exiled out of Israel by the Romans and they fled to Babylon, what did we do? We created the Babylonian Talmud, which is the backbone of Jewish literature. Without it, we would be a people that is much more ignorant than today. We may not even be the people of the book, as we are called. After the Spanish Inquisition, we responded with the Kabbalist of Tzfat and with the school of Kabbalah that came and revived the Jewish world. After the Holocaust, many say, well, the state of Israel was created. Today, you have more Jews learning Torah in yeshivas in Israel than ever before. And it's just one example. We have the IDF that now stands strong and defeats any attempt towards anything that is resembling to the final solution of the Nazis. So again, each time we face the challenge, we respond with growth. That's true on a national level, but it's also true, I believe, on a personal level. When we face challenges, we ought to respond with growth. I know that psychologists will tell you that for every challenge, there is the fight or the flight response, right? You either fight it or you flee it. Judaism doesn't believe in neither. Judaism believes in learn from it and grow from it. That's the response. And this is exactly what this year's blending of the Holocaust Memorial Day and the festival of Tu B'Shvat really represents. I think it's just so beautiful that yes, 6 million of us may have been murdered brutally, and it's probably the darkest period in history. But look, we respond with a Tu B'Shvat attitude. Let's grow our trees. Let's grow our people. Let's continue to illuminate the world and never give in to the evil that we face, no matter how big and how monstrous it is. I will quote to conclude. I wrote about this yesterday for the Holocaust Memorial Day, but it's interesting to note that Chaim Weizmann, who was the first president of Israel, just shortly after the Holocaust, 3 years after the Holocaust to be exact, in 1948, in one of his first speeches to the Jewish nation, as the first president of the state of Israel, he beseeched Jews across the world that now that Hitler murdered a third of the Jewish people, it's up to each and every Jew to be a third more Jewish, because that's the Jewish approach. When we face destruction, we ought to respond with construction. That's part one of this email. Part two is a very sad story that has within it a question. And that is, my girlfriend has a very sick granddaughter. She went to see Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he suggested that she change her name. Can you talk about this, please? She did change her name, and unfortunately, the granddaughter died. Okay, so I'm not sure about. I'd like, and we can continue this conversation later on, Hannah. But I want to know exactly if Rabbi Steinsaltz asked her to change her name completely or to add a name, because in Judaism there are two ideas that really relate to the same, that stem from the same core. One idea is that we change a person's name. Why? Because we truly believe that names are the source of our life. They provide energy, so to speak, to our existence. The name of a person is that person's channel for God's life. And that's why when a person feels sick, then a person should add the name Chaim, or the name Chaya if it's a woman, or a name that has to do with life, or a name that has to do with healing, like Raphael, for example, or names like that, in order to channel the blessing of healing to the person, so that his life force now is enhanced with what the name, the significance of the name, what the name means, the meaning of the name.
So
that's the addition of the name. But sometimes, yes, we do have to change a name. Why do we have to change a name? Because the name sometimes is just not a name that is necessarily a Jewish name. And we've done that before at CBT, where a person has a name that doesn't sound quite Jewish, or that it doesn't sound like an old traditional, maybe Yiddish name. And then the name has to be changed so that the life force of the person, again, can be enhanced through that name. The life force that is carried as mentioned by the names of the people. So Hannah, maybe that woman had a name that was not particularly Jewish, and therefore he changed it to add the blessing. Or maybe
no, my friend is a professor actually in Chicago, and she's Israeli, and her name was Sarah, which is very Jewish. And her
Sarah, okay.
Sarah, and her granddaughter lived in Israel. She was 5 years old, and she went to see. I was telling her about Rabbi Steinsaltz and you and how I met him, and then she told me the story. And then she went to see him, and he said, "You should really." I don't know the exact.
Right. I'd love to speak to her more about the details.
She changed it to Efrat, which is a Hebrew really.
So I will mention this, and I've heard that the name Sarah sometimes can carry good blessings, and sometimes not so much. In fact, there was a visitor from New Jersey, I believe, on Sukkot, who had the exact same story with a different rabbi, Rabbi Kanievsky. That I think it was a relative of his who had the name Sarah, and it was changed also. There are names, I'm no maven in this. There are names that can carry also not just positive things, but sometimes negative things, and therefore, the great rabbis like Rabbi Steinsaltz or Rabbi Kanievsky can then ask the person to change the name. Now, by the way, and as mentioned, as we see very tragically in this story, it's no guarantee that if we change the name, that all of a sudden a miracle will happen and the person will return to his health. Sometimes it's just, we have to do everything in our part, just like we have to pray, just like we have to go to the doctor and listen to what medicine tells us. We also have sometimes to change the name. But again, none of that is a guarantee. That's in Hashem's hands. But we have to do our part.
But I know one thing, Rabbi. Her last name is Ifan. She teaches at University of Chicago. She's brilliant. But the thing that happened, she did like meeting with him. I mean, she just really thought the world of Rabbi.
Right. Fantastic. Okay. No, and thank you for these questions. Okay, next question. This is a question about the COVID vaccine that we were just speaking about. So, dear Rabbi, what prayer should I say when getting the COVID vaccine? Now, I don't know if there's a prayer that is to be said when getting the COVID vaccine, just like there's no prayer to be said when we get any other type of medical treatment. But there is a prayer to be said, as we spoke about, I think, a few weeks ago, when we recover from a big disease. If we had COVID and we recover from COVID, or if we had any other disease that really debilitated us, then we have to say the prayer of Hagomel. But for the prayer for the treatment itself, there's no blessing. Why? Because there's a concept that says that en mevachim al davar ela al davar shemugmar, which means that a person should only bless something that is already finished. The vaccine is part of your treatment. You haven't seen the complete healing yet. Yeah, that the antibodies are not just beginning to enter your body and then to take this, take their form. So it's not completed yet. Just like you don't say a blessing over a cake that is in the oven. Once the cake is out of the oven, then you say mezonot and you eat the cake. You can't say a blessing on something that is not completed yet. So there's no blessing of the vaccine. But again, if the healing is complete and one suffered, then there's a blessing of a gomel, which is a blessing of gratitude.
Rabbi, can I inject a thought?
Sure.
Or interject?
Sure, Dan, please.
Perhaps we can say a prayer that says, give me the strength to take what I was just given and let it have the effect we want. It's not so much a bracha.
Right.
It's a bakasha. It's a request.
I like that. I'm glad you mentioned that because it alludes to something that Rabbi Steinsaltz would encourage us to do quite often. And that is that we should, beyond the texts themselves of the prayers that we ought to say each and every day, he would encourage us to write our own prayers for any circumstance. So you're saying that, and I fully agree with you, and Rabbi Steinsaltz would also agree with you and say that we shouldn't hesitate to speak to God. And that's already beyond the rituals and beyond the textual blessings that we ought to recite.
Yep.
Even when I'm driving down the highway, I can say a prayer to God. Or when I'm having a vaccine, I could say a prayer to God. Or even, there's no thing that is too little for God. Let's remember that God is infinite. And for the infinite, everything seems equal. Whether you ask for $10 trillion or whether you ask for $1. Whether it's a little child that asks for a candy or you're asking for good health. For God, it's just as important. He's the infinite. This is the finance, just as infinite. And therefore, absolutely, we shouldn't hesitate to speak to God, really at any time, and even create, not just verbalize, but even write down those texts, those prayers, as Rabbi Steinsaltz would do too.
Rabbi, I feel like it's the Hana show, but so the reason I was asking is I was watching, I watched a lot of rabbis, but one of the rabbis was getting the vaccine shot, and as he was getting it, he said the Shechianu.
Yeah, I know some people say the Shechianu quite loosely. I don't know if I agree with
Rabbi, I didn't agree with him. I felt it was kind of out of context, like, oh, here I am, Rabbi, big shot, I'm getting the shot. And
yeah.
Anyway, I was just curious.
No, that's fine. Okay.
Thank you.
Rabbis are not immune to anything. Judaism doesn't immune you to anything. And
well, he did get the shot, so that was nice.
Okay, very good. Okay. All right. And next question. So, dear Rabbi Allouche, how do you get to the place where you can forgive someone who continues to behave in a nasty way? Although I know it is what I should do, right, to forgive, I am stuck and just cannot reach that point. Okay, it's an excellent question, and I really believe that it's a question that everyone struggles with at one point or another, because life is full of hurt. We're hurt by people. I mean, unless you live alone as a monk in Tibet, then you'll interact with people, and people will almost inevitably hurt you. So I think it's a question that really everyone at some point or another struggles with. How do you reach that point of forgiveness? It's a good question, and it's a question that is necessary because, as you rightfully mentioned, it's something that we should do. We should forgive. In fact, let's start off by saying that the Talmud is very strong on this point, that everyone should forgive. In fact, every night, and we've mentioned this prayer before, every night before we say the Shema, before we go to sleep, we say the prayer of letting go, of forgiveness. God, I forgive everyone. God, I forgive anyone who may have angered me or hurt me. And it's one of the great, I think, genius points of Judaism, because it enables us really to rejuvenate ourselves and then start the next day anew with no baggage from the past, being able to truly embrace the new opportunities without being shackled by the hurts of the past. So it's certainly a very, very important idea in Judaism. Now, in addition to that, Talmud also says, Kol ha'ma'avir al midotav ma'avirin lo al kol peshav, which means that a person who is able to overlook those that hurt him, then God overlooks all of his sins and he forgives them all. If you act that way towards others, God will act that way towards you. You may not deserve forgiveness, but if you forgive others, God will forgive you. That's how powerful this idea of forgiveness is, and that's why it's something that we each ought to achieve each time we are hurt. But the question, of course, was, how do you achieve that? What are the tools? So I think that Judaism provides quite a few tools, but I'm going to mention 3 of them tonight. Number one, I think tool number 1 is to know that the person that is hurting you is not always intending to hurt you. And even if he is intending to hurt you, it may be because you are failing to look at the entirety of the person, at the context of the person. If you would be able to understand the context of the person, you wouldn't judge him so quickly, and you wouldn't reach the conclusion so quickly that he hurt you. Take, for example, someone who is in a bad mood. So a person is in a bad mood, acts like a jerk, excuse my language. Now, he might hurt people when he acts like a jerk. Does that mean that defines him? No, he was just in a bad mood. It happens to everybody. So one has to train himself to look at the entirety of the person. It's interesting because there is a Mishnah, beautiful teaching from the Ethics of Our Father, that says, "Havedan et kol ha'adam lekaf zechut," which means that you should judge every person favorably. But if you look carefully at the words in Hebrew, it says that you should judge every ha'adam, every the human being, not every man, but every the man favorably. What does that mean? Why ha'adam? Why the man? To say every man, call Adam. Why ha'adam? And that's because sometimes we don't judge people favorably because we only look at one very particular aspect of the person. But if we were to look at the person, the entirety of the person, we would judge them favorably. Oh, he's acting like this. That's not his fault. He was raised like this. He's acting like this. He was just fired from his job. It's not his fault. He's acting like this. He has a sickness. He's acting like this. His spouse gets on his nerves. He's acting like, we don't know what happens behind closed doors. And if we were able to truly look at the entirety of the person and give him that benefit of the doubt, we would judge them favorably. We will not be hurt so quickly. That's tool number 1. Tool number 2, I think, is also one of the important tools that Judaism provides, and it's something that I think speaks really to the internal being, because we have to believe that people do change or do evolve. We know this. We are not the same person as we were, maybe not as we were yesterday, even though that's the goal. We should be a different person than we were yesterday, but we certainly are not the same people as we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, maybe even 1 year ago. People evolve. And we have to understand that sometimes forgiveness comes from this notion that we recognize that the person who hurt me is not the same person today. And therefore I can forgive him. Because the person who hurt me was a different person. He was that person of yesterday, but he evolved. So therefore I'm able to forgive him. Now, if you come and tell me, well, he hasn't evolved, he's exactly the same evil person, then I will come and say, well, fine, let's flip the tables. You evolved, you changed. So the person who was hurt is not the same person that is today. You are today. So that person that was hurt, leave that person behind. Aren't you supposed to renew yourself every day? Being a different being every day? Aren't you supposed to be reborn every day? It's like saying someone coming to me and say, in previous life, this and this person hurt you. I'm a seer. I can see it. It was in previous life. Who cares? I'm living a new life now. Well, guess what? You're living a new life each and every day. And it's something that is much deeper, maybe more philosophical, more spiritual, but it's something that we have to take into consideration in the context of forgiveness. Because if I evolve, then the person that was hurt is a person that doesn't belong to me anymore. It's almost like Rabbi Stans says about prayer, but yeah, I think I mentioned this, that they once asked him, well, Rabbi Stans, to say the same text of the Siddur, of the prayer book, each and every day is boring. So Rabbi Stans responded, no, we change every day. So the way we look at the text changes also every day. Maybe the same text, but we change. So we look at it from a new perspective. And then he said that if we don't look at it from the new perspective, it means that we haven't changed. And then it's not the text that's boring, it's you that's boring. And I would say, I would apply the same thing regarding forgiveness. If I'm a new person today, whatever happened yesterday, So what? That person hurt that person. I'm able to renew I'm a different person today. That's tool number 2. Tool number 3 is the Joseph tool. What's the Joseph tool? If you look at Joseph, my favorite biblical character, no matter how hurt he was by his brothers, and I'm sure he was. Remember, they threw him into a pit, sold him to slavery, where he was then accused of rape, where he ended up in prison for 10 years, where he finally finds himself as the vice king of Egypt, now welcoming his brothers. They didn't recognize him, he recognizes them. He could have said, I'm very hurt. They ruined my life. They did. Let's look at the facts. They actually did. I mean, miraculously became the vice king, but they ruined his life, at least his youth. But he didn't take his revenge, and he was never upset at them. Why? Because he applied the Joseph tool. What's the Joseph tool? He himself verbalized it. When he revealed himself to his brothers, he says to his brothers, no, you think you sold me here? I wasn't sold here. I was sent. You haven't sold me here. God sent me here. We can look at life in the context of being hurt or forgiveness, and in every other context as us being sold or us being sent. What's the difference? If I'm sold, I'm a victim. But you know what else he sold? This water bottle he sold. Things that have no being, no life are sold. Things that are as passive as could be. But if I look at life as sent, I'm in charge. I'm in the driver's seat. And I'm in the driver's seat not because it's my car, it's God's car. I'm only there finding myself even in the worst of conditions because God sent me there. I have a mission to fulfill. God believes in me, and therefore he sends me to the worst of places. Now, in the context of forgiveness, I would apply exactly the same Joseph tool. And what do I mean by that? That if someone hurt me, maybe it's because God wants me to be hurt now, and there's a mission for me to fulfill with this hurt. Whether it's a mission that has to do particularly with this relationship, that is maybe through hurt, I'll be able to grow from this relationship and therefore make the relationship stronger, or maybe through hurt, I'll be able now to be careful towards others. And that those words that hurt me, I'm thank God I learned from this lesson. I'm not going to apply towards others. But whatever it is, I see myself as sent. I see myself as God's ambassador. And God sent me here to a place in which I'm hurt for his personal reasons that I have to figure out. So ask myself, fine. I don't know why, but there's a divine reason there. And I have to look myself as being sent. Now, the Joseph tool, I recognize it may be the hardest tool out of the 3 tools that we mentioned. But if we can't achieve any of them, I would say that there's 2 steps to forgiveness. Step number 1 is simply to not let it occupy your mind, to move on. Someone hurt you, you ask for forgiveness, or they asked for forgiveness, or they didn't, you move on. Step 2 is to go back, look at what happened, and say, I forgive. Yes, the goal, as we mentioned at the very beginning, is to forgive. But if I can't achieve that, then I ought to just let go. And I think that eventually when we let go long enough, we'll be able to look at what happened with fresh eyes and then learn to forgive. Sometimes it takes time. But I'll conclude with this story. It's a story not so much in the context of forgiveness, but it's a story about being hurt. And it's to me, it's a disturbing story, but the lesson is worth repeating, and therefore I'm saying it. But again, it's a very disturbing story, but I'll mention it. The uncle of the Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory, had an uncle. who owned a huge forest in Russia. And one day his entire forest burnt down. Now, back in the day, they had no insurance. You couldn't go and sue your insurance to collect. When his entire forest burned down, it meant that he lost his entire livelihood in one day. So a group of Hasidim decided to go and visit him, to comfort him. They came to his house and they saw him studying a page of the Talmud as if nothing had happened. So one of the Hasidim says to his friends, I'll approach him. Maybe he didn't quite hear what happened. Maybe he didn't hear that his forest burned down. That's why he looks all normal. And I know tragedy because my son died 10 years ago. So I'll be able to speak to him. He approaches the uncle of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and he says to him, I understand, you're acting all normal. You're learning Talmud as if nothing had happened. Do you know that your forest burned down? And the uncle responded, looks at him and says, do you know that your son passed away? He said, what do you mean? That happened 10 years ago. I somehow got over it. The forest was just burnt yesterday. The uncle then responded, then why use the maximum of time to get over something when you can use the minimum of time to get over something? So my forest burned down yesterday. Life moves on. Now, it's a disturbing story as mentioned, because I do believe you need time to mourn. You need time to really heal your emotions. But the message, I think, is very powerful. Sometimes we drag things with grudges and with all sorts of toxic feelings. And life moves on. Why don't we move on? Why use the maximum time to get over hurts when we can use the minimum time? If not through forgiving, then at least through letting go. So we mentioned 3 tools, but if none of them can be achieved, at least let's move on. Let's move on. Why, as I think it was Nelson Mandela said, why allow people to live in your minds rent-free, especially those people that you dislike? So that's really the big perspective on forgiveness that I think ought to be applied. It's not an easy thing, and I know, but it's certainly something that's achievable. And as mentioned, and I'll conclude with the way I began, that if we are able to forgive others, as the Talmud mentions very powerfully, then God will forgive us too.